Welcome to the Legalpreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Sager, and I'm dedicated to covering common legal issues for small business owners and just how some of the world's most elite entrepreneurs have handled legal issues themselves. In true attorney fashion, the information in this episode is not legal advice. This is for informational purposes only, and you should always consult with your attorney before implementing any of the information. Now, on to the show. Welcome back to another episode of the Legalpreneur Podcast. Today, I have somebody who is on the other side of things. I have my own podcast producer on here, Laura Wiese, who is the co-founder of Time Traveler Media. She is the brains and the perfection behind the Legalpreneur Podcast. This would definitely not be possible without her. So thank you, Laura, for making this podcast what it is. And for being here today. I'm excited for the listeners to hear about your story and the legal stuff we're going to chat about, because I know it's not something that I chat about, and I know it's something that's very important for small business owners to hear about. So thanks for being here.
Oh, absolutely. It's so exciting to be on this show that I spend so much time on. I love the Legalpreneur. It is one of my favorite projects in my roster, and just really happy to be here and share that small business vibe.
Yeah. So Laura and I connected back in February at Podcast Movement Evolutions. I knew I wanted to start my podcast. It had just been something in the back of my mind, but I knew I needed a producer, and I just hadn't found anybody that I really jived with. And Laura came up to my booth the last day of Evolutions, and we literally just hit it off. We were talking there probably for like an hour. Yeah. And I was just like, okay, I think I found who I want to be my producer. So luckily, and she got this thing rocking and rolling super quick. We released at the end of March, right? Yeah, at the end of March. So we met in February, middle of February, got it up running just a little over a month later, which is super quick. So she is a rock star when it comes to podcast production and all things, just making it happen. So let's get started and tell the audience how you got to where you are today. What else did you do before Time Traveler?
Yeah, so I actually come from, I always say that like 3 different threads of my life that seemed completely unrelated ended up threading together when podcasting came into my life. So in my first life, I was actually a performer. My degree is in acting. I have a BFA in acting, and I was a stage actor for a few years in my early 20s. I toured the country, and
that's awesome.
Yeah, I worked regional theater, and that was my dream forever. That was all I ever thought I would do. And it was one of those experiences where I actually got to experience my dream job, and it wasn't my dream job.
Oh, been there, done that.
Yep. And so I noticed pretty quickly that I didn't like having to work on other people's schedules, on other people's projects that didn't feel aligned with me and my values. I should have known at the time. Looking back, it's cute that I wasn't aware that owning my own business was what was going to end up happening. But I quickly pivoted into voiceover because I needed to figure out a way to use the skills I'd gotten in a way that was more flexible.
And that makes sense. You have I've never told you this before, but I really like your voice. It's very calming and soothing. So that makes total sense.
So you might have heard my voice before.
Oh.
I've been a voiceover artist for 12 years, and I've worked online, on your TV, on your radio.
So what are some bigger famous ones? I know we want to hear it now. Yeah.
Let's see. I've worked a lot with QuickBooks, and I've done tons of stuff. Oh God, it's so hard to say. I've worked on thousands of projects at this point.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. I had no idea.
Yeah. And so while that's no longer my main focus, because generally, voiceover is a very inconsistent industry, so it's really hard to build a knowledge of your stable income on it. You can have good years, and then your next year is just flatlined.
Oh.
And so I slowly realized that might not be the end game, even though it was going well. And so on the side, because I was starting this production job as a voiceover artist, that A lot of people think of it as talent, but since it moved online, that's actually where I became an audio producer, was for my own work as a broadcast voiceover artist.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so I started doing, about 12 years ago, I started working for myself as an audio producer, and then just slowly got better and better and better. While at the same time, in an unrelated path, I had a day job, or a series of day jobs, as the executive assistant to multiple small business or startup CEOs. So I was always in this non-creative space, osmosis learning business technique while I was running my own creative venture that I didn't yet call a business because I come from an artistic background. We didn't look at it like that.
Yeah.
Which I'd love to talk about how all artists own their own business and they have to see it that way. But I hadn't been trained to do so. So I had the luck of working with multiple CEOs in multiple different industries, whether that's San Francisco startup, I worked with a VC, I worked with multiple consultants. And around 2015, the bridge came together when a new CEO approached me and asked me if I would work with him as his executive assistant and the producer of his podcast, because I had this background in audio.
Wow.
And it was such an obvious choice because the audio skills needed for producing broadcast voiceover are much more stringent than podcasting. And so I was absolutely skilled to do podcasting, and it just was a natural transition. And what came out of it was this really cool connection between my background as a performer and a person who crafts messaging, my knowledge of audio, and my long-standing background of working one-on-one with business owners and entrepreneurs and thought leaders to help them craft their messaging, because I was always right-hand man. I was ghostwriting for people and helping them craft their conference speeches and things like that.
That's awesome. I had no
Yeah.
idea. That is so cool.
Yeah. And so about 5 years ago, it all came together, and I quickly realized that there was an opportunity here that didn't even exist when I was in college. And I left my job in 2017 to do this full time. On the back end, my partner in business and life, Marshall, he comes from film and television production, and he was also ready to leave his industry. So we started this together, and so we offer just cross-platform podcast production for video and audio and just the amalgam. We cover film and television production background with audio background and corporate and entrepreneur background. So the whole thing just was perfect for podcasting and tossed me into the heart of something that I wouldn't have expected to find and just instantly flourished with.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I had no idea about, and surprising because we chatted, I feel like forever at Evolutions. But no, and that honestly, like, that's what I love about the podcasting industry. And I was very intentional about, I guess, breaking into the industry because I knew that there weren't many attorneys just serving the industry.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to go sponsor the conference, set up a booth, see what happens. And it's really awesome just to be able to be part of the podcasting industry because, I mean, 10 years ago, like, it didn't exist. Like it did. It was just starting. But there are so many people that literally have become who they are because of podcasting.
Exactly.
And I just love being part of this seriously just brand new industry that is changing the world. So I'm really glad that we connected, and I'm glad to know all of that about you. I had no idea. Like, that's really interesting. So let's get some actionable stuff here. So I would love to hear if you had any legal exposure while in those roles as an executive assistant.
A lot of it had to do with patents, actually.
Yep.
And so I was the interface between a lot of patent lawyers. And I would say my general vibe with attorneys, actually, before I started working on this show, really, and maybe in the years very prior to now, when we started to work with attorneys directly, I felt as though if an attorney was getting involved, something was wrong.
Yeah.
And that was very kind of triggering. So I was kind of scared of working with attorneys because I felt like it was going to make things nerve-wracking.
Mm-hmm.
And so working in the positions that I worked in other people's companies, it was a little bit a safer space to kind of interface with attorneys and see how they work and kind of dispel that myth for myself. And
Mm-hmm.
so once we began this company, I was a little bit warmer to it, but I still had a sensation of if a lawyer has to get involved, we're in trouble.
Yeah, and I mean, as you know, that's really the myth that I try to dispel on this
Totally.
show is, it's not always about, being in trouble when you get your lawyer involved. I try to empower people by working with me or working with any attorney because there's a lot of different ways that you can be empowered as a business owner by working with an attorney. Obviously, there are times where you need a lawyer to handle issues, but really my goal is to help business owners put themselves in that position of power and use their intellectual property, use their know-how to their advantage and even make even more money.
Right.
So cool. So yeah, I now want to hear about what your experience has been in time traveler media with legal.
Yeah. So when we started Time Traveler Media, we were able to incorporate voiceover, podcasting, and my partner's background in film and television because under the media label. So we incorporated our services together with the knowledge that we were eventually going to be solely podcasting, but we needed to transition out. And one of our very first experiences once we did this was a large project that we were contracted in on as one piece of a multi, like a, there were so many people working on this project. It was a large scale LA production. It was a series of online videos, but it was just a large scale production. And worked on it. Everything was fine. No big deal. And then the check didn't come.
Mm-hmm.
And then the check didn't come. And when we reached out, we found out that the line from the main production company was that their client hadn't paid them yet.
And how much money are we talking about for you?
It wasn't a significant amount. It was about, I think like $5,000.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Which is still a lot of money. Yeah.
totally for us as a new company, it was like we're going to fight for this money, of course.
Yeah.
And so the process was interesting because we've been through this before. Non-payment and slow payment in the Hollywood production world is really common.
Yeah.
And so originally we were just like, all right, benefit of the doubt usually works out. No big deal. And then it just kept going. And then it
Oh
just kept
no.
going. And we started to find out that one by one, some people were being paid, but we were being pushed off saying it was going to be another 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. And then the
Ugh.
check didn't come. And then the check didn't come. So at this point, we were connected with an attorney that focuses directly on this type of work. And they laid out a really interesting opportunity where they would advocate for us. They would do everything and they would get a settlement and we wouldn't have to pay anything up front. They would just take a portion of the settlement, ensuring that we would get what we were owed.
Right.
And we had multiple people when we started going forward with this tell us not to.
Oh wow.
That was what was really interesting was a lot of
Why?
a lot of other people who work in the same production world had been burned by lawyers, or I don't know, there was just this
Yeah.
weird negative tone. But we knew that if we tried to take it to I forget, civil court, small claims court, I don't know what it would be.
Yeah.
If we went to take it ourselves, it wouldn't work. We know that because my partner years prior had actually done that. He always says that he went through law school long enough to realize he didn't want to become a lawyer, but it made him feel confident that he could represent himself in small claims court. So
Right.
he took a client for delinquent payment to small claims court, won, and then had no clue how to get damages.
Yeah. And that's the thing. So for those listening, just because you get a judgment in court, the judge says, okay, you owe this much money. They don't have to pay you on the spot. They do have payment terms, like you have to pay by this date, but guess what? If they don't pay it, you have to go a different route to get the money, essentially is what I'm saying. So just because you get the judgment awarded by the judge, that doesn't mean they're paying you that day or even within a month or two. You have to go down a whole nother route, almost like another proceeding. So go ahead. Yeah, tell me what
Yeah.
happened.
So he had no idea how to do that. So it just dead ended. He had put in all this work, put himself through a small claims court, and then had no clue how to go forward. So we knew that that was not a route for us in this situation. So we started working with this attorney. And what was really interesting was they started asking questions, not just about the production company that owed us money, but about their client.
Mm-hmm.
And about the branding names that were on the contract. So it was a collaboration between multiple brands. And it took a long time, it took a lot of conversation, but eventually we ended up settling not with our client, but with one of the brands whose name was attached to it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they ended up paying it because they didn't want the bad mark on their brand name.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. And that's why it's so important to, whenever you're entering into contracts, some people may think, oh, I'll just enter with my name. If you have an LLC, you better be entering into contracts with your LLC. Now, if you are renting a brick and mortar, leasing a space, they're going to require a personal guarantee. So they will, if you have an LLC, they don't care. They want your personal name. And I don't know of any commercial real estate companies that will allow a lease with just a company name, especially for small business owners. So if you have an LLC, whenever possible, always make sure you're entering into contracts with your LLC, because if not, they can come after you personally. So the attorney that you were working with, I know that they were just exhausting, figuring out, the best route, like how this route is exhausted, how, what other routes can we go down? And if you have that personal guarantee, if you're in a contract with somebody personally and not just their LLC, well, you have more means to go about collecting. So did you get the full 5,000, or do you remember how much it actually was that you got?
Almost within $100.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And so it was really nice to just write that off and say, hey, this happened, and we didn't actually have to we just had to take a few interviews with them and give them some information. They would call and check up and say, do you have any more information, any more ideas, more paperwork communication paper trails? And they just did it all. It was a great experience.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome to hear. I love that, because most of the time you always hear, oh, this lawyer screwed me over, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. I'm really happy to hear that. So how long did it take from the date you originally never received payment to the date you actually got the payment?
10 months.
10 months. Okay. So that's honestly not that bad. Some people, it can take years and years.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, how long did the small claims court experience go on?
It actually didn't get there. They basically, I don't really know the terminology, but they called them the small claims court. They called everyone, they sent up, I think, subpoenas. I think that's the word.
Yeah.
They subpoenaed people to small claims court, and instantly one of them called and was like, we want to settle. We don't want this on our name.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So whenever your partner, how did he originally get the judgment against them?
So in Los Angeles, because there is so much production, there are interesting, and I will say that I don't quite understand these mechanisms myself.
Yeah.
But there is a lot of regulation around workers' rights, even if you are a freelancer and you are a vendor into a production. And so I know that he was instructed to go through those routes to ensure that the state had basically said, yes, this is not okay. And yes, these are the damages that you are owed. So we were able to, through California regulations, get paperwork.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I know California, especially LA and New York, they are very protective of their freelancers, which is amazing. But I know the most recent, I don't even know the details of the
AB5.
Yes.
Good intentions, bad results.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I would say that the second that AB5 was passed in California, I was deeply relieved that we had incorporated into an LLC, because we had multiple freelancers in our community instantly lose contracts, because the basics are either you have to hire someone on as a full-time employee, or you can only work with them so many times a year. And what that ended up doing was creating a loophole for people to be like, okay, well, I can hire someone who lives in Nevada to do this remotely. I don't have to hire a California freelancer.
Mm-hmm.
And it hurt the California freelance industry so badly that I started reaching out to my California clients and saying, hey, I know some people that work with you in similar ways to us are freelancers and independent contractors. We are an LLC. We are a company, and you can continue to work with us. We are not a part of this. I had to communicate that in a very careful way to ensure that it didn't affect us. But I don't know where AB5 stands. It was one of those things I paid attention to before COVID.
Yeah, yeah.
But I do know that a lot of people in my professional community ended up being very negatively affected by it, especially people who work for newspapers or are journalists. They were deeply
Wow.
affected by this because usually they work for 5, 6, 7 different newspapers or outlets online, and they work for them more than 20 times a year each.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember hearing all the fallout about that. But I know that people were trying to get it repealed or fix it or something. But for those listening, they're like, I have no idea what that is. So California passed a law that said trying to protect freelancers.
Yeah.
And like Laura said, good intentions, bad result. California was trying to protect freelancers from getting taken advantage of when they should be classified as employees. But the thing is, many freelancers enjoy being freelancers. They intentionally don't want to be employees because number one, you get the flexibility, and number two, I guess I don't know what number two is.
Well, some industries are built for freelancers. A lot of the creative industries, we
Yeah.
don't want to work for a single company. And
Mm-hmm.
AB5 was specifically created to curb issues with Lyft and Uber.
Yes. Yes.
That was the impetus for it, but then it ended up reverberating. Like, there are some orchestras and theaters in our state that say we can't continue under this regulation. We have to
Oh my
close our
God.
doors because we can't hire
Yeah.
65 instrumentalists full time so that they can play 25 shows a year. That's not how this industry works. And all of us as creatives are traveling and we're working with multiple people, And so it was this very unintended consequence that I think they are in the process now of basically like back regulating to make sure that it didn't overreach. But it is an interesting piece of legislation that I usually would have supported the concept of. I absolutely support that, the rideshare industry needs to be much more heavily regulated because it is absolutely taking advantage of its freelancers. But it didn't really translate. They didn't talk to the arts community at all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think they are fixing it. I don't know when, especially now that COVID has hit. I
Yeah.
know there's so much going on.
I would know if it weren't for the fact that I don't even know where to find the information now because it's so deeply buried on every news source.
Yes, no, exactly. Oh man. Gosh, yeah. So any other legal experiences you want to leave us with?
Let's see. I have been mostly lucky to not run into too many
Mm-hmm.
issues with my legal. And so, we're in the process. We just put in our trademark stuff, and I
Yeah.
am starting to take it more seriously and build that wall of protection, as Andrea says. We are starting to do that as we build and scale our business and start to take Time Traveler to a more forward focused brand. For the last 3 years, I always kind of say we were incognito. We worked one-on-one with people as kind of their silent partner. And
Mm-hmm.
now in this year, we're starting to move forward. So my face will be out a lot more. The Time
Love
Traveler
it.
brand will be out a lot more. And so now I'm starting to take the legal seriously.
Love it. Yeah. So as a podcast producer, I have seen many issues with producers and hosts, like who owns it. So have you had any issues? Not that I think you would like pull one over on somebody and say, hey, I own this, you don't. But have you had any hosts or any companies come to you and are very strict and a stickler about it? Like, hey, we own this, we need to get this in writing. Like, I'm just curious about how you see it on your side.
Yeah, so we explicitly state in our contract that we do not own your content. We do not want to own your content.
Yeah.
You own your content. We are simply the arm that gives your content legs to run. And so it is explicitly stated in our contracts that you are the sole owner of your content, and we will never try to make that move. And as long as a producer serves as the paid element to take a podcast and prop it up and help it grow, I don't see any ownership there personally. It's different if there is a trade. You're not necessarily trading money, or if there is a profit sharing mechanism. I know with one of our clients, we make a portion of their ads as part of our payment. So that's an interesting little detail, but we still...
that's where it gets muddy, is when there's a revenue share agreement. That's when it's like, okay, well, who actually owns this? And then if the producer, finds a host for the idea of their show, because in that situation, typically probably the producer owns it. If the producer's like, oh, I have this idea for the show, I just need to find a host. Well, in that situation, the host probably doesn't own the show.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that those situations need to be explicitly stated up front. And, a lot of people start podcasts for fun, and they don't realize that it is intellectual property.
Yep.
That has value. And if you don't set those structures up for yourself to understand that from the beginning, it can get really ugly. I have always operated from the space that unless I am offering my own intellectual property to a show and not serving as the refiner of intellectual property, we do not have any ownership. And we've always moved forward very clearly with that.
Good. Love it. Yeah. So let's go ahead and leave the listeners with your one tip.
Yes.
One business tip.
My one business tip is always look for the education in every situation you're in. I know that I have had projects that I disliked. I know that I have had things that haven't worked. I've had things that have worked. I've spent whole years of my life working on parts of my business that I might necessarily not want to be working on. Every single element is going to inform your next step. And if you look at it as, this is drudgery, it's just going to be remembered as a bad experience. But if you look at it as, this is a necessary education, even if I don't know what the education is yet, I might not know what I'm going to get out of this, but I'm going to come out of this smarter and more capable. And then I got to figure out how to take that new education and wield it for more success in the future.
Love that. Oh my gosh, you absolutely nailed it. I'm so glad that we're going to end it on this note, because it's so true. Gosh, I've gone through the same things, and that was perfect. So you guys, if you are not following her on Instagram already, go follow Time Traveler Media. It's at Time Traveler Media. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Perfect. Yep. Go follow them. It'll be linked in the show notes. And seriously, if you guys are thinking about starting a podcast, or if you have a podcast and you're just like, oh my gosh, this is taking too long, I don't know, I don't want to edit this, hit her up, because they are absolutely amazing. Seriously, I just record and send everything to her, and she takes care of the rest. So very seamless. I'm very hands off. I record, and that is it. So thank you so much, Laura, and I will see you guys next time. If you found this information helpful, I would be so grateful if you could share it with a fellow business owner. And it doesn't cost anything to rate, review, or subscribe to the show. Your support helps me reach more listeners, which allows me to support more business owners in their entrepreneurial journey. I'll see you next episode.